Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through today's topic. We're taking a journey far beyond the fictional horror stories that kind of clutter up our modern internet, and we're venturing into the very real and just completely fascinating forensic science of a 7,000-year-old crime scene. We're going to look at exactly how modern science can basically read ancient dirt to tell us how our ancestors lived, fought, and died. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. 1. Beyond Scary Stories. 2. The Secrets of Skatehome. 3. Decoding Dynamic Cadavers. 4. The Science of Decay. 5. Honored Dogs and Ancient Violence. And 6. What Bones Leave Behind. All right, let's get started.
Section 1. Beyond Scary Stories, Myths versus Reality.
So, we have this kind of strange habit in the modern world of inventing terrors, when the truth of our own past is often way more striking. If you browse around platforms like Wattpad today, you're going to find endless collections of scary stories. Tales of ghosts, haunted houses, and completely made-up killers like the Hatchet Man. We invent these fictions to give ourselves a little thrill. But as we'll see today, the visceral flesh-and-bone realities buried in our Earth from 7,000 years ago are far more gripping than any internet ghost story. The real stories of human survival, extreme violence, and profound social connection are quite literally right beneath our feet.
Section 2. The Secrets of Skatehome, Ancient Swedish Site.
That brings us to our real-world sites of investigation. Skatehome is an incredible archaeological site located in Scania in southern Sweden. Around 7,000 years ago, right during the Mesolithic period, a really stable, highly adapted community of hunter-gatherers lived here along a coastal lagoon. Excavations have revealed over 85 graves across two main areas. But what makes Skatehome so incredibly remarkable is how intimately blurred the lines were between the living and the dead. The deceased weren't just banished to some distant cemetery. No, they were buried in shallow pits, often sprinkled with red ochre, directly among and even beneath the huts of the living. It was a community where you literally lived right on top of your ancestors.
Section 3. Decoding Dynamic Cadavers, Decoding the Dead.
So, how do we actually know what happened to these bodies thousands of years ago? Well, this brilliantly illustrates a rigorous scientific method developed by French researchers known as anthropologie de terrain, or field anthropology. You see, a cadaver isn't just static. From the exact moment of death, the body is highly dynamic. As soft tissues decay, gases form, and ligaments break down, the bones actually shift and move. By combining intense archaeological field observation with a really deep biological understanding of exactly how a human body decomposes, scientists can work backward to reconstruct the precise original state of a grave. It's like putting together a giant puzzle. Now, a key concept in this taphonomic science is label articulations. I know, that sounds like a bunch of dense jargon, but it simply refers to the loose, superfragile joints of the body. Think about the tiny connections between the phalanges of your fingers and toes or the cervical vertebrae in your neck. Because they're surrounded by very little connective tissue, they are the very first things to break apart and scatter during decomposition. Therefore, if an archaeologist uncovers a skeleton and these tiny finger and toe bones are perfectly connected in their natural anatomical position, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the body decomposed exactly where it was placed. It wasn't disturbed or moved at all after death.
Take a look at the data documented in the Skatehome 2 study. The researchers painstakingly documented these labile joints. In Burial 1, the joints of the right foot are perfectly connected. In Burial 2, it's the right hand and both feet. Because these incredibly fragile connections survived intact, scientists could definitively classify these as primary burials. Basically, this means these individuals weren't stored somewhere else and moved later on. They were laid to rest in these shallow pits, fresh, and the earth embraced them exactly as they were placed.
Section 4. The Science of Decay, Bone and Earth.
Let's see how this builds our understanding of the microscopic interactions between bone and earth. When an archaeologist looks at a skeleton, they are essentially looking at an epic battle between gravity and dirt. If a body's buried in a coffin, what we call an empty space, as the soft tissue vanishes, gravity pulls the bones outward and downward into that empty void. The skeleton basically collapses flat. But if a body's buried in a filled space, meaning it's packed really tightly into the dirt, the sediment progressively replaces the decaying tissue. The dirt gently fills the voids left by vanishing muscles and organs, which holds the bones suspended in their original posture.
This brings us to an absolutely fascinating concept called the effet de paroi, or the wall effect. Imagine a bone that naturally wants to roll over due to gravity once the muscle around it is gone. If sediment packs directly against it early on in the decomposition process, it acts like an invisible mold. It literally locks the bone in a precarious position of disequilibrium. The Earth's wall effect is quite literally the invisible fingerprint of the dirt, perfectly preserving the exact posture of the deceased.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how these principles expose completely invisible objects. Take GraveXV here at Skateholm, for instance. Notice how the rib cage has slid entirely under the right upper arm. That absolutely shouldn't happen in a simple dirt burial. By looking at this, scientists deduce that this person was buried with a perishable container or shroud, maybe made of wood or hide, placed right next to their chest. When that organic material decayed, it temporarily created a secondary empty space beneath the earth, and the rib cage collapsed into that void before the dirt could even fill it. So we can actually see an object that vanished thousands of years ago just by the way the bones fell. How cool is that?
We see another incredible anomaly in GraveIX. Look at the ribs. Instead of collapsing inward like you'd expect, the anterior ribs have fallen outward and away from the body's central axis in this very unusual rotation. By applying field anthropology, researchers realized this person must have been placed on top of some kind of bulky organic material. As her body decomposed, the material underneath her also decomposed, leaving a void that caused her back to drop and her ribcage to splay outward. Again, the bones are drawing us a picture of clothing, bedding, or offerings that simply no longer exist.
Section 5. Honored Dogs and Ancient Violence, Cultural Stories.
Let's zoom out from these microscopic bone movements for a second and look at the cultural stories they reveal. The dirt at Skateholm honestly reads like a dramatic novel. One grave contains a man whose bones show he survived a horrific boar attack that crippled his leg, only to be killed years later by an arrow that remained lodged in his pelvis. Another grave holds a man buried face down, with arrows shot into the ground over him. This is a practice that's often interpreted as a community's terrified attempt to pin a dangerous spirit to the earth and prevent their return. In another, a young woman is curled up beside an older man, which raises some really intense questions about social hierarchy and even possible sacrifice. And most uniquely, this society lived alongside dogs that they treated with intense spiritual significance. The duality of how they viewed these animals is just staggering. Some dogs were clearly treated as honored equals. They were laid carefully to rest on their sides in a sleeping posture, sprinkled with red ochre, and given their very own grave goods like deer antlers and flint knives. But other dogs were treated merely as disposable offerings. Evidence shows some had their necks violently snapped and were unceremoniously thrown into the partially filled graves of humans as a final, brutal closing ritual.
It is also vital to report that these bones hold clear evidence of severe interhuman conflict. Skateholm contains one of the earliest documented cases of scalping in all of Europe. Found among these Mesolithic remains, it demonstrates that this specific form of violence and trophy-taking is an incredibly ancient practice. It's something that developed independently across various global cultures long before recorded history.
Section 6. What bones leave behind? Final thoughts.
So the crucial point is this. When we combine biology and archaeology, we aren't just looking at a static pile of bones. As the Skateholm study concludes, this exact methodology allows us to completely reconstruct the original rituals and gestures of past societies. By understanding empty spaces, filled spaces, and the shifting of those fragile joints, we can actually see the invisible organic materials, the vanished shrouds, and the deeply complex social behaviors of a people separated from us by 7 millennia.
The history written in the earth is far more thrilling than any fiction we could possibly invent. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder as we conclude this explainer. 7,000 years from now, when the soft tissues of our current world have entirely vanished, what will your physical remains tell the archaeologist of the future about how you lived? Thank you so much for learning with me today.